I've been thinking about this idea that our experience when we travel to different events, marathons and festivals, is so subjective. And whenever we think about, oh, is that festival a good festival, or is that marathon a good marathon? I realized with myself that what I remember about the event, how I think about it, and how I describe it to other people is very much influenced by things that have nothing to do with the event. So it is sort of where I'm at psychologically and physically, how I'm feeling that day, what I had for breakfast, how much sleep did I get. Most of the time, those are the things that are going to impact my experience at an event. And, you know, I always knew that. I mean, it makes sense, right? You want to make sure you have enough energy and your body feels good. Like, logically, that makes sense. But, you know, I used to run myself into the ground. I used to have this, I don't know, demand and requirement that I stay up all night and dance all night until 6 a.m. And then I had to do it again the next day, starting at the very beginning at 1 p.m. or something, because it seemed important. But it's kind of like, I guess people say this thing about chocolate, which I don't relate to. I don't know. But people say, you know, the first piece feels great, tastes great, and then the second piece maybe doesn't taste as good as the first one. I feel like it always is good, and maybe that's how I feel about tango. I have this feeling like it needs to just be more and more is always better. So that's the lens through which I was examining my experience in tango. But I got to tell you, the more I talk about events, and we've been discussing this amongst, you know, each other. Some of my friends are starting to plan their travel, and I talked about the whole idea of finding tango events a couple of weeks ago in an episode earlier this month. So it's been on my mind, and I thought I would share with you some of the things I've learned about traveling for tango that kind of was not something I wouldn't call it like you must do it this way. Just some things that I concluded for myself that maybe wouldn't ensure that every event I go to is amazing. But if I can have some sort of control over these particular factors, most of the time my experience goes from so-so or mediocre to outstanding. And if not outstanding, really, really good. And I'll go away completely happy, no matter what the level in the room is or how good or bad the DJing was. Like, there are times that I feel so excited and just good overall that it's like it doesn't matter what the actual specifics are. I'm just there to experience whatever. In the same vein, if some of these things, as I'm going to share, if I don't sort of have some sort of say over them and I don't think about it ahead of time, can make me pretty miserable. And I've been at some events where I go and the music is amazing and the people are awesome and everything's great, and I am dying. Like, I don't like anything, and I'm bitchy and I'm tired. So that's going to be what I share. And I'm really curious if my list resonates with you, and maybe you have some of your own things that you kind of learn about yourself. I'm really curious to hear from all of those out there who actively travel for tango. It'll be interesting for me to hear from you. So, by the way, I am Yelizaveta, and this is the Tango Banter. If this is your first time, welcome to the banter, and I invite you to check out the links in the show notes, because if you want to experience this bantering in a live setting, I go live inside my Facebook group on Fridays. So if you want to participate and contribute to the discussion, make sure you join the group, and hope to see you in there. I'm curious, one of the questions I had for myself when I was thinking about this episode was, am I talking to people who travel a lot for tango, or people who are just starting out traveling and don't know much? So I don't know. I don't know which one it is, but I'm going to try to speak a little bit to both. And if those of you out there who are just starting out in your tango journey and you are eager to start traveling, but you have specific questions that maybe I am not going to address in this episode, please make sure you shoot me a message and let me know, because I'd love to give you what you need to encourage that spirit of you going ahead and traveling for tango, because it's really fun. It's really fun to travel to festivals and marathons and experience that energy. And I was just recently reminded, I randomly stumbled upon a video on my computer from a few years ago at a marathon called Las Mujeres Tango Marathon, which was happening in Seattle for just maybe 3 or 4 years. It was not very long. And my friend captured one of the milongas. She captured the La Comparsita, the whole room dancing together. If you are interested in seeing that video, it's actually posted on my YouTube channel. And yeah, I was watching that video and I was thinking to myself, wow, yeah, that special moment when you dance with this group of people for hours and hours, and everybody's tired and sweaty, and there's just this magic, this absolute magic in the air, and you see everybody's so into it. It's a very beautiful experience to be a part of it, to watch it, to sort of soak it in. So I always encourage people to take that step as a tango dancer as soon as possible. I know you've got to be of a certain level of proficiency to enjoy an event like that, but it's not as much as some might think. So those of you who are starting out, please reach out to me, and you can let me know, what is it that you think stands in the way of you going ahead and starting to travel for tango. And you can reach me on social media at IMSO Tango. I'm so tango. So would love to hear from you. So let's start there. If you are a beginner and you think, oh my gosh, where do I even start? How do I even begin to choose one festival over another? And to me, I think you got to go with the path of least resistance. So for many dancers, there is a local marathon or festival in the vicinity of where you live, somewhere. Now, I know some of you out there maybe live in remote communities and you might have to drive a few hours, but you'll be surprised. There are marathons and festivals popping up all over the place. I'm actually excited. I just signed up for the SoCal Tango Championship. That's going to be happening in March 7th through 10th. And I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes as well if you're interested. Let me know if you're coming. I think it'll be pretty fun because this year they're doing it not in LA proper, but in the website, and see if you want to come out and join that festival. So just starting from that place of like, see what's around you, because there's always something happening at least once a year, twice a year. And this way, you don't have to really think about the travel part of it as much. You just have to deal with just the more psychological part of it. But once you've gotten that out of the way, and I always say, like, the first one is really the hardest one, honestly. For me, when I started tango, I think I was dancing for maybe a year and a half at the most. And my teacher at the time convinced me to sign up for a festival, and I had no idea what that meant. And it was a festival in Istanbul, of all places. It was a huge festival. This festival is like really well known. It's been going on forever. I think it's the one in July, because I think they have several. Chicho and Juana were headlining. And I didn't even know the significance of that. Honestly, I did not watch the performance because I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Like at that time, I didn't really know much about tango. So even then, it's so funny. Like even as a beginner, I just never was into performances. I just thought of that, because I thought that may be something developed with time. But even as a beginner, I was like, it didn't really capture me the way I would expect it to. So I went to Istanbul, which was an amazing festival. The Istanbul Festival is a highlight. I highly recommend you check it out. And it's particularly good for followers, because I used to hear this a lot, that if you're a leader, your tango heaven is Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, right now, that might not be as accessible to us dancers as we would like. But Russia, St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Ukraine, those places have had some amazing dancers, especially when it comes to followers. There's a lot of women there. And so I've heard a lot of leaders, a lot of men really pursue going to festivals in that area geographically and living there even for months at a time and just dancing. So for women, I highly recommend Istanbul, because especially this festival, what I found was that it drew a lot of dancers from Europe. So there were a lot of leaders, and there were all kinds of leaders. There were leaders from Germany and Russia and Spain and Italy, and then the Turkish dancers. To this day, I've never danced with a Turkish dancer who is not at least really good, but mostly amazing. And I've actually talked to a friend of mine who is Turkish. I've actually talked about this with a number of Turkish people, where I asked them, why is it that Turkish dancers have this natural ability, it seems, to dance well? And some of them said that it's because they grow up dancing, like dancing folklore or dancing in their families or at celebrations, that it's just part of their culture. And some people also suggested just the sort of that's a more physically tactile culture, like maybe they hug more and have more of like that physical contact. So I thought that was an interesting. If you have an insight about that, I would love to. I'd love to hear. I just thought I would do an episode on like how different cultures represented in tango dance differently. Like I definitely noticed that when I was living in Buenos Aires and I got to dance with like Russian dancers versus Italian dancers versus Japanese dancers, very different feel, but very distinct in its own way. So that would be really interesting to banter about. But anyway, I'm getting off topic a little bit. So my first festival was really, really intense. And even though it was really magical, like the evening milonga was held on the rooftop overlooking the river and this huge bridge, and you had this skyline and there's just this breeze and live music. I think This is where I heard Hyperion Ensemble for the first time. They're a contemporary orchestra. They played. It was the first time I heard live music. Just really amazing experience. But I was so overwhelmed. So overwhelmed. The first Milonga we went to, I had a panic attack. It was insane how strange and difficult and scary it was. So, depending on where you're at in your journey, it's totally valid that you might feel kind of overwhelmed by the idea of going to a big event. Just know that the first time is really the hardest one. And that after that, once you have that experience of being completely bewildered, it gets easier right after that. So I hope that encourages you to make those steps. After that first festival for me, from there on, any festival I went to, eventually I realized this really profound idea, perhaps, and maybe that sounds kind of crazy to you at this point, but this is one of those things I've learned just from doing it a lot, is that all the festivals are pretty much the same. They're all the same. The little details differ, but there's kind of like the same structure. It's the same kinds of DJs. It's the same music. The music is literally the same kind of etiquette. So once you have an experience of a couple of big events like that, you already will have pretty much experienced all of it. From then on, it's more like the venues, different locales, different communities, but you can pretty much expect to always have a very similar structure where you'll have the afternoon milongas, the evening milongas, and there will be certain expectations that you can just go in with. To me, it's a very comforting part of going to big events like that. Like, I can imagine if somebody told me, hey, there's this 3-day event on, I don't know, Ikebana flower arrangements. Do you want to come? I'd be like, what? I have no idea what kind of energy that requires. I don't know why that came to my mind for some reason, but I would be pretty overwhelmed, right? Like, a lot of our stress about going somewhere new is that we don't know what's there, right? So there's this really nice part of tango travel that I can just rely on, that I know the drill. Gonna fly in. It's usually there's a warm-up Thursday milonga somewhere that's kind of connected to the event, but kind of not, maybe, And then Friday's the opening of the main event. It goes through Sunday. There will be a closing milonga Monday. Like, there's just this peace of mind that I don't have to consider those things. And to that end, every time I travel, I always try to extend that predictability to more and more of my experience, so that it takes less and less of my mental energy to take care of all these other things, so that I have all of my energy available for the event. So the things I'm going to share with you, that's kind of how I'm approaching it. Is that when I think about going to a festival, it's very much like an athletic event for me. I think of it more in those terms because I just really have learned through some really painful experiences about my limitations. We have to know our limits, honestly. Like, we have to consider everything from our daily movement to our age, to our flexibility, to our sleep. Like, all of these elements are going to dictate our limits when we go to a tango event. So the first one for me that always comes back to bite me is my sleep. The sleep part of it, which is kind of frustrating. And I'm starting with that one because I know that that's a big issue for a lot of people. And it's the number one thing people complain about when they go to a festival. They complain about not getting enough sleep for whatever reason. And some of those reasons, a lot of times, have to do with maybe they're staying with somebody in the room and that person has a slightly different schedule, or they snore, or, there's some sort of conflict in how they cohabitate in the room. And so one person or both people don't get enough sleep. Sometimes it's things that you absolutely cannot control, which, it could be you're staying at a hotel and you're staying next to something that's very loud, a construction site or a motorcycle shop. That happened for me when I lived in Buenos Aires. I was staying at this artist residency, and there was a motorcycle shop across the street from me, which would start revving their engines at like 9 o'clock in the morning every day. And I'm like 20 feet away. It was so upsetting. So that can happen. And so I try to think about that ahead of time and just make sure. And one thing I've learned for myself is that if there is an opportunity to upgrade, and the upgrade specifically has to do with me ensuring that I'm going to get better sleep, go for it. Like, really spend the extra money, get the room on your own, don't share. Or if you stay somewhere, make sure you have your own room. One time, there's a particular hotel in San Diego that we stay at when we go to a marathon there. And both times that we stayed there was a very loud family right next door to us with a child, screaming child, multiple of screaming children. And it drove me nuts. And what's funny is that when we were coming for the second time, they gave us an option of this other room that was over a garage, and there was nobody next to it, but it didn't have a balcony. And for some reason, we decided a balcony was more valuable. But that night, I learned my lesson, because I was like, whenever given the chance, whenever given the choice of choosing something that will give you a better chance of getting better sleep, go for it. Do not think twice about it. That's been my lesson. The other thing that I really love, and I already mentioned that, is whenever I travel, I try to stay as close to the venue as possible. I've done the whole stay 10-minute ride, Uber ride from the venue kind of thing. I've done that. And anytime that I've traveled during the summer, sometimes I might stay somewhere where I can actually ride a bike. Like when I was in Denver, Denver on the Rocks, really nice festival. Our Airbnb was maybe a 15-minute bike ride away from the venue. So it was really cool and fun to ride the bike at night, in the middle of the night. And my friend and I rented bikes, and we would blast tango music on our phones as we were riding through the city at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was super fun. But at the same time, that's an extra layer of effort that you always have to think about. And I kind of feel like it puts this pressure on you. At first, it might feel okay, but then if you're really tired at any point and you're in that place where I just wish I could lie down for 30 minutes, but you're thinking, okay, but I gotta go get a ride and get to the Airbnb, and it's just too much, right? So if you can, stay as close to the venue as possible. And if there's an option to stay at the hotel, I gotta say, to me, I still prefer that, even though I really love staying in Airbnbs, because I love being inside other people's houses and seeing how they design the space. And I also love staying with friends. It's super fun to have like a group of 8 to 10 people staying in the house. And I love that. But if I were to choose between the two, I don't know. I think I probably more often than not would choose to stay at a hotel just because it's so convenient and it's so easy and everything's taken care of. And a lot of times there's a gym. So if you, if you're health conscious and you want to like limber up your body while you're there, you can go down to the gym for a little bit. And just the feeling that you can step out of the milonga, go take a nap, and then come back and dance. And you don't have to worry about directions. Now, the downside of a hotel festival, I gotta tell you, I'll be honest, is it looks a little generic, okay? Because all hotels, unless it's the historic Biltmore Hotel in LA, where Gavito Festival is, which is amazing. That venue is definitely worthwhile to dance in. It's like this huge, opulent hall that you can just imagine yourself being in somewhere in Bridgerton, I guess. But most of the time, hotels are very cookie cutter, right? So it'll be just a very typical hotel interior, temporary floor. It'll be nice and comfortable, but it's going to lack that character that a lot of times you can get when you go to a dance venue or a venue that's sort of designed for these kinds of events. So that's kind of the trade-off. But the convenience of staying in a hotel is pretty amazing because you can really then just focus on the dance part and not worry about sort of what's around that. Now, if you are staying in a house with people, which I've done a few times, I highly recommend that you are very picky about who you stay with. You know, sometimes we're kind of on the fence and somebody will say, hey, you want to share a room or like split an Airbnb? And if we're very money conscious, we'll be like, yeah, let's do this, because you just want to save the money and you don't want to say no. And so you'll just say yes. But from experience, it's really uncomfortable once you're there. And if you find that there's some friction or somehow you don't fit in or you feel uncomfortable or stressed out in some way, it just doesn't feel, it takes away from the whole experience. It sort of makes me contract and not feel at home, not feel just totally at ease. And there's a little bit of effort involved because if you don't like the person, you have to pretend and act diplomatic, which we all can. And ultimately, I'm sure I'm going to end up in those situations again, no matter how much I try to prevent it. So we can do that. We can put on the front and be polite and get along. That's a necessary human skill. But when you're traveling for tango, I think of it as like, that's my time. This is my dance time. And I don't want to sacrifice my well-being, which part of this sort of stress of acting a certain way to someone or not being comfortable around someone, that's kind of stressful, especially when you're like recovering and you might be groggy, you're getting up, you haven't had enough sleep. Like I tell you, that first day you wake up from dancing until 3 or 4 in the morning, I mean, it really can feel like a truck ran over you. It feels like a hangover to me. I don't drink. I literally don't drink any alcohol when I dance. But even if I get decent sleep, like I might get 6 hours of sleep, go to bed at 5 and wake up at 11, you just feel discombobulated. Okay. And in that state, it's really nice to have exactly what you want, right? So I tend to be a very introverted person. I don't like a lot of noise in the mornings. I like quiet. I want to be able to go outside and meditate and sit and write and just sort of, be with my thoughts. Some people are extremely extroverted and they want to interact and they want to talk. So you got to consider that when you're staying with people, like, is there room for you to be and have what you need, right? Versus, is it going to be a lot of work? So that'll be something for you to consider. And I mean, a lot of times I still prefer actually staying by myself if I can do that. I really love staying on my own. I have a lot of friends who do the same thing, and it's a little bit of a luxury, I feel, when I just get to have my own space. And that's kind of, I've always been like that, Now, another thing that I've learned through all of this experience of traveling for tango is that a lot of my best experiences, the kinds that I'm going to think about afterwards, that I'm going to tell my friends about, a lot of them actually happen outside of the festival. Whether it's me stepping outside for a break and sort of talking to whoever's outside with me, or it's going to dinner with some friends, having a deep conversation with someone, or it's like a party at a house randomly that I get invited to, or an after party, which did happen a couple of times where by chance I ended up at some house and there's 10 people and music is playing and it's almost sunrise and people are like completely still in the flow. And it's kind of a magical experience to run into that. It's not something you can predict or plan or even search for. But I've learned to, even though, I'm this kind of creature of habit and I really love things the way I like them in the order I like them because I like the feeling of safety it gives me. At the same time, I have to remind myself to stay open to changes, to be flexible, right? To be malleable, because if I'm not open to new things happening, I will miss out on an amazing connection or a deep conversation with someone. And that's kind of the thing that I'm after when I travel. Like, what makes me excited to travel is all the amazing people I'm going to meet and how we're going to interact with each other. So I have to keep that in mind for myself and just seek that out a little bit more. Sometimes I get shy, and I know I'm not the only one. So those of you out there who are a little bit more introverted like me, just know this is a very common feeling where you feel like, well, there's nobody here who knows me, or I don't know anybody and I'm not that cool. So I'm just going to leave now. So there will be like a milonga and it's over, let's say. And there's this feeling like, well, nobody knows me and nobody's talking to me and I don't have anything to say. And instead of me standing there, I'm just going to awkwardly go ahead and leave. I used to do that. It used to make me very uncomfortable to be in a place where like I have no one to talk to. I still am very uncomfortable with that. And I'm the kind of person who has a hard time doing small talk with strangers anyway. So I do end up in those situations where nobody's talking to me, in which case I like to be in the corner away from everyone. So I have a knee-jerk reaction to remove the possibility where I don't get invited somewhere and I get rejected and feel left out. So I'll just, cut to it and go ahead and remove myself from that. And that's sort of my MO. So I've learned there's a conscious intention that goes into it for me to stay open and flexible and allow for things to shift, even though they might feel like they're going to somehow get in the way of your experience. Like, it might seem like, no, I shouldn't go out right now because I need my sleep. This is me talking to myself in my head. I shouldn't go to the after party because it's almost 6 a.m. and I'm going to be really tired. And then tomorrow I'm going to be really upset. And so that's like my normal. But sometimes it's like, man, just go for it. Go for it. See where this leads. Like, there might be something there. And sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's a complete waste of time. But even in its waste of timeness, there's an experience there that is valuable where you can be like, okay, well, I learned that, you know. So stay open is the overarching message that I tell myself. And I think it's a good practice to have that mindset when you go to a festival, no matter what experience you are anticipating having, that there is a chance that this experience might be something different, you know, whether positive or negative, but that's kind of what we're there to find out, right? One thing I know that's probably true for all of us is that we spend a lot more time thinking about going to a festival and having it sort of looming ahead. And then we're at the festival and then the festival's over and we're back to our lives. Like most of us don't really think about the festival in hindsight as much as we do when we're like anticipating it coming into our present, right? And one thing I noticed for myself that is fairly recent, this is kind of a recent discovery, that it really makes a difference to take the time after a festival to do something for the purpose of closure or reflection on the event. One of the things that I started doing is messaging people. And you got to do it right away. Like, I cannot do it if I don't do it the day of or at the latest the next day. Then it's like, oh, I never did it. You know, I've had so many events where I had amazing connections with someone. I think to myself, oh, I got to message them and just reach out and say thank you and, you know, send them the thing I was talking about. And then I never do it and I forget. Sometimes I even write it in my notebook and I'll write down names and then I don't do it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So it's been part of my gradual realization to say to myself, you know, the festival experience is all of the things you go through. Like the full package is, you know, you register, you choose it, you sign up, you anticipate it, you prepare, you get your airfare, and all of that is the beginning of it. And then there's the middle part of it, which is the actual event. You're there. And then there's got to be like a gradual, logical end to it. And it's not when you just say goodbye at the end of the last milonga and you leave. Like, to me, that seems so empty. It's like, oh, that's it. That's done. I'm not going to see these people again. So a lot of times it does feel that way. And the last couple of times that I went dancing at big events, I took the time the next day to reflect and message certain people and just tell them how much I appreciated meeting them or dancing with them. With some of them, I had a conversation about our dance. And I noticed that doing that creates a sort of a synthesis. It's like you're synthesizing what just happened. Maybe you even have a conversation with someone. I mean, I love debriefing, and that's something I do a lot with my friends. Anytime we come back from events, I'm like, okay, how was it? What did you think? How was the music? How did you like it? Like, it's a nice way to have a conversation and distill the information that you got, the experiences that you had. It's really important. Now, one thing I learned, in order to be able to do that, okay, this is practically speaking. Let's say that you go to a festival and you are going to a Sunday night milonga that ends at 4 a.m. and you're going to go to the hotel, sleep for 2 hours, and then get up and go to the airport to catch a flight to go back. And when you arrive, you have to go to work. This is a very common scenario I used to hear from people. And I think if I have to do that, which I've had to do that a few times, it basically will erase any possibility of me having that time of reflection the next day after a festival. You know, it's just like all of the energy, all of that heart and joy and magic that I was describing, like the magic I see in that video of Las Mujeres, like it kind of evaporates in the face of the stress and the physical exhaustion. And the mind shifts and you're somewhere else. Now you're in your regular life. You're back in, the everyday. So this leads me to my last insight that to this day, I sometimes have to defend this because I know for some people it's just not an issue. But to me, I've learned when I travel to tango events in particular that number one, they are timed reasonably so that I don't have to do that I don't have to only sleep 2 hours and then rush off to the airport. It's so much nicer to just wake up and have time to like do some yoga, have some breakfast, take a walk, sit in the park, message some friends, debrief, talk to someone, like whatever you want to do. It's so nice to have that as the kind of smooth exit out of the experience of the festival that concludes with you leisurely, which is my favorite word, going to the airport and coming home. And you're coming home inspired, refreshed, rested somewhat. You're ready to face the world again. It's not like you have to catch up, right? That's kind of how I feel the difference for me if I allow that timing for myself. It's like I'm ready to just move on with my life versus I've just crashed and burned and I have to recover, which is, I spent so much of my time doing that. So in order to have that time to really absorb what happened at the festival and create some concrete memories for yourself that you can take with you so that festival is something that's unique in your mind. It's not just some random event in the past. It's nice to have that. It's nice to have that reflection time. So timing your flight a little bit later is so great. And I did a poll a few weeks ago because I was talking about this in a separate episode. I did a poll among the listeners on Spotify of whether people prefer, sleep and a more expensive flight versus a cheaper flight but less sleep. And the more sleep won out, okay? It did win out, not by much, but it did. And I think it should be part of that ritual for us to just treat ourselves nicely, treat our bodies nicely all the way through the event so that we can do this for as long as we want, right? That we don't have to suffer the consequences of letting go of that. And to that end, with the flights, I definitely don't do connect flights. Direct flights, even if it's more expensive, I think when you're traveling for tango, especially if it's to a different time zone, forget about it. That takes so much out of you, that whole like going up and down on the plane. And for some people, they don't mind. One of the tango dancers that I know, she's a flight attendant. And this woman's energy is insane. She's able to fly and then go to Malanga, dance all night, get a little bit of sleep and fly again. And it's, it doesn't faze her. But for me, that's a difference between me having an awesome time and me possibly having a nervous breakdown. Because sometimes too, with connecting flights, there might be delays or you have to get off the plane. Maybe you don't have to get off the plane. It's just such a mess. So these are the top, 7 things that I could think of that to me these days when I plan my travel, these are my anchors that I use for somewhat controlling and creating the best possibility of having a great time at a festival. Let me know if you thought of any more, or if you have certain things that you think you want to share. And yeah, let's continue this banter next week, shall we? Until then, ciao.